Welcome to Lesson 1, Data Entry Part 1. In this little program, I'm going to show you just a very simple little store, sort of like a program that you'd use if you were going to run a store and you wanted to get information from a customer. This is a very simple one, and you see that I have a regular form that starts up in the center of the screen. I'll show you how to do that. We've got 3 buttons, and we've got a text box over here, and we've got a little label. This little guy here that says name is just a label. And this one down here is also a label. I just made it much larger, and I also changed the border style so that it looked like a 3D effect. I'll show you how to do that too. And what this does is if you type in the name of somebody or whatever you want to type and you click OK, it takes whatever is inside this text box and puts it down here inside this label. Okay? And then if you hit clear, it erases both the text box and the label, but you'll notice it also puts the cursor back into the text box. So I'll show you how to do that. It's just a little program to get you used to the idea of data entry and moving things from a text box into another control like a label. And when they hit end, it simply ends our little VB app and comes back here. So in design mode, let's take a look at some of the things that I have on here. These are just simple buttons, and if you push F4 on any of these objects, it will bring up the properties window like I showed you in class. And let's see what I did. I named this button BTN Print. I could have called it BTN OK. It would have made more sense, I suppose. I guess I called it Print because it kind of prints a receipt off into this label here. The Clear button is BTN Clear, and this is the name property. And the last one, BTN Quit, is this one here. Now, one of the things that students always mess up on is the name property versus the text property. In VisualStudio.net, the text property is what you see on screen, either on a form or on a button or whatever. And so this one I put end, this one I typed clear, and this one I typed OK. But notice that what it says on screen is very different than what the name of the actual control is. Remember, we're going to rename our controls to something very useful and something that makes sense to us, because in a minute when we try to get them to do something, we've got to be able to recognize them. If you left it button 1, button 2, button 3, it'd be really hard to remember what they do. Now this one up here, this text box, is just a standard text box that I renamed TXT name. And one of the things that you may find is when a text box first is on the screen, let me go into the toolbox here. When we first put a text box on here, if I grab another one real fast, sometimes, doesn't seem to do it then, but sometimes it'll actually say text box 1 or something in there, and you may want to get rid of that. If I put a label on here, watch what it does. See, that says label 2, and you don't want label 2 to show up on your nice form, so all you do is go in here to the text property. I double click it until this is highlighted, and I just hit the delete key or hit the backspace, and then hit enter to lock it in, and that takes away the label. I want to show you one thing about these darn labels that bugged me. Do you see what that one did? Let me get rid of this one. We want to get rid of a control, by the way. Just click on it, hit the delete key. That's so easy. But I want to show you something about these labels that are pesky. You put a label on here, and then you think, well, I want to resize the thing. In .NET, for some reason, they have set something here called the auto size property. Look at this. It's true, and what we want it to be is false. So I always just change it. And once you change it to false, then you can adjust this thing the way you would in previous versions. Don't know why they do that, but I don't like it. While I'm at this, why don't I show you the border style? Remember, auto size lets you use your control just like all the other controls. You want to set it to false. I do anyway. And then the border style, if you want it to look like it has a little line around it, you can make it fixed to single. If you want to, you can make it 3D, like I did this one on the bottom. Just pull this down and put fixed 3D. Okay? Now I'm going to get rid of that because obviously I don't need it, but that's what I did to this one. This one's called LBL Receipt, for label receipt. It's not really a receipt, I guess, but it's just an output window for taking whatever they type in the text box and putting down here. So I'm just pretending it's a receipt. And let's see, one other thing. When I designed my form, I called it FRM main. Now you could call yours FRM store, FRM start, whatever you want. Call it something that makes sense to you, but I also want to point out one thing. on the hard disk, when my project is saved, notice that Form 1 is saved as form1.vb. I did not rename that. I could just right click on it and say rename, and I could call it FRM main. I could call it the same thing. But in this case, I'm just going to leave it alone for now. You got enough to worry about as opposed to worrying about those kind of things. Okay, there's plenty to learn. And let me show you two other things about my form. On the text property, I called it Ron's Little Store, and the text is what comes up on this caption. It used to be called caption, and you're going to hear me call it caption all the time, but I'm trying to learn the new terminology. But they call it the text property. You can call it whatever you want. If you leave it blank, what Visual Studio will do is put on the name of your project, and in this case it would say Data Entry Part 1. Well, that's not very exciting, so I just put on something else. Here's the other thing I wanted to show you. In the start position for the form properties, now remember, when you're trying to change properties or characteristics of a form or a button or whatever, make sure you click on that thing first, and then it shows up in this window. They do have, let me show you here. You see this little drop down? They do have a shortcut to these things so that you can switch to the properties of all your different controls, and that's relatively new, and I'm just not used to using it. But there, I could switch the properties of the main. I could go to a different button. I suppose it saves you a little time of moving around with the mouse. But I wanted to show you that in the form properties, out of all of these things you can change, look at all this stuff. Okay, one of the things that I like to do, and I would suggest you do, is to set the start position property to the center of the screen. Now notice what you can do. You can set it to manual, and that means people can move it around wherever they want. The default location is kind of where it was when you started your project, when you created it. Windows default bounds, don't know what that is, never used it. I use center screen. I don't know what the center parent would be unless you had multiple forms. Alright, so I'm just going to choose center screen, and that means when I push F5 to run my application, make it go, it starts up in the center of the screen regardless of what size of screen they have. Okay, so I kind of like that. Now let's take a look at the code and see what this thing does. First thing you got to do as a programmer is you got to think. Now you've designed this thing, now you got to think about making it do something. When they click, let's do the end first. When they click on this button, I want my program to end. Now what you're going to see shortly in some of the other applications, when they click on end, we're going to come up with a little message box that says, you sure you want to quit? You know how the nagging things do. Well, in this particular case I didn't do that. I just ended the program. Here's what you do. We have to have a place to put our code for when they click on this button. Now the first time you do this, you just double click on this button, and Visual Basic, let me close this, Visual Basic will create for you, see here, it says private sub btn quit, that's the name of my button, underscore click. Now this is called a click event for this button. It's also called an event handler. It's also called a subroutine. Just depends on how long you've been programming. They just keep changing the names of these things. Now the reason it's an event handler is, you remember that a property is what the characteristics of these objects are. In this particular case, the property of this button for text would be the word end. Property for its name would be btn quit. That's what I called it. But when someone clicks this, when a user clicks this thing, it causes an event. It means something happened. And Visual Basic has been programmed, and Microsoft programmed Mr. Button so that it can respond to a lot of different things. Look what it can respond to. And here in the drop down, up here where it says btn quit, if I drop down this, look at all the things that buttons are allowed to respond to. They can respond if someone changes the color, if someone clicks on it, of course, if someone presses the enter key, if someone has the mouse key, have the mouse hover over it, if someone presses a key on the keyboard. There's just tons of stuff that buttons can respond to, but 99.9% of the time, of course, we click on buttons. Okay? Now look at this. Ignoring all this mess over here for a while. Okay, just kind of not worry about that. When they click on the button, Visual Basic is going to stop what it's doing, and it's going to jump in here to this click event and see if it's supposed to do anything. If there's nothing in here, and nothing for it to do, then it's not going to execute any code. It won't do anything. But in this particular case, I want it to close my application. The new .NET way of closing your application is to simply say me which refers to the form itself, dot close. So when I type me, let me show you, I'll get rid of this. When I type me, and I just type in lowercase, you guys, because Visual Basic will change the case the way it wants to, so there's no use worrying about it. Just type me, and when I hit dot, it comes up with a whole list of things that my form can do. I can set its background color. I could set, first of all, I can tell it to close, which is what we're going to do. I can tell it to center to the screen. I can set default margins. I can set a cursor. Look at all this stuff. Tons and tons and tons of things that this thing can do. What I want it to do is close. So I'm just going to type C, and you'll notice the little IntelliSense comes up here and tries to help me, and it comes down here to close. Close is a method. Close is an action that you, the programmer, are going to tell the form what to do with itself. Okay? Now watch. When I hit enter, boop, it just capitalizes me and it puts in these little parentheses. The parentheses are there in VisualBasic.net because they're there in case we want to do something else with the form at this time. And we're not going to pass it any other information, so there's nothing inside those parentheses. In Visual Basic, when you want to pass information from one thing to another, they're in parentheses. You see these parentheses? The operating system is passing me two different pieces of information inside these parentheses. What it's doing right now, we don't care about. We'll talk about that some other day. But this is how you do it in Visual Basic. That's how you do it in most languages. You just put stuff in parentheses. Okay? So, again, when they click on this end button, it triggers the click event for that button, and it's going to come in here and close. All right? If there's no code in here, or if I erase this whole thing, the button would work, it just wouldn't do anything. I mean, I could push it up and down on the screen, but it wouldn't do anything. Let's take a look at the others. When we click on the clear button, when my program's running, what I want it to do is I want it to erase what's in this text box and erase what's in this label and put this cursor back here. So there's three things I want it to do when they click on this one. So you can do one of two things. When you're first making a click event for a button, again, just double click on it. I already made one, so it knows to come down here. So let's take a look at the click event for what I call BTN clear. Here it is here. It's a private subroutine. It's called BTN clear _ click. And you can see down here at the end that the code in here is going to handle the BTN clear click event. That's what that's there for. Okay? If you erase this, your button won't do anything. Your program won't blow up, it just won't do anything. So let's see how we're going to do this. First thing I want to do is clear the text box. The text box is called TXT name. And one of the challenges you're going to have is remembering what you call all these crazy objects on here. Well, they've tried to help us a little bit. Watch. If you click on this drop down, it does keep track of all of your little controls. So at least you can see what it's called. Okay? So I called it TXT name, and then in Visual Basic 05, one of the things that you can do is you can use the clear method to clear out all text boxes. This is new. So you type TXT name dot and choose clear from the list, hit enter. Yes, it puts in the parentheses again, don't worry about those. And now when this line of code executes right here, it'll clear the text box. Okay? Now I want to go ahead and clear the label. Now I called mine LBL receipt. So I want to change the text to nothing. Unfortunately, for some reason, labels don't have a clear method. I don't know why, but you're going to have to just get used to the fact that labels for right now are cleared by changing their text property, setting it equal to basically nothing. You see what these are? I'm going to open these up. These are double quotes. Now if I was to put in here Ron, it's going to change the what it says in that label to Ron. Well, we don't want that. So what you do is you just use two quotes. When I do it, I just go quote, double quote, that's it. Okay? And that tells VB, erase what's in there, reduce it to nothing. It's too bad it doesn't have a clear method, but it doesn't. And then finally, what I want to do is I want to set the blinking cursor back to this text box. And the way you do it is you choose TXT name in this case, or whatever you call your text box, dot, and text boxes can respond to lots of stuff. You can make them visible or invisible. You can, let's see what else they got here. We can set the alignment of the text. We can control how much text they type in. We can change its size. We can select the whole thing. Look at all these things. A million things here. You can do stuff I've never even thought about doing before. But one of the things that's very handy is to set the focus. So all you do is just choose it. Now you guys, when I do this, let me show you. When I do this drop down stuff, I do this, and then I hit F for focus, and it gets you pretty close. Do one of two things. Either hit the space bar, see what that does? Or, let me go back. Let me do focus, and then hit the tab key. The tab key takes you right over here to the end of where you were typing, and then I hit enter, and it is done. So you use the tab or the space. Now one last thing I want to show you. Notice that these little remarks that I've put in here in green, anytime you want to comment your text, and that's really important to do so you'll remember what it does or let someone else know what it does, you start a comment by using an apostrophe. And then anything I type after that is completely ignored by Visual Basic. You can type as many comments as you want. I encourage you to make really good comments to yourself so you remember what you're doing, and it doesn't make your program run slower. It doesn't make it do anything. It's not make it bigger. Those are all torn out when your program really runs. Okay? Now you'll notice I do it two ways. I don't know why, but I kind of got in the habit many years ago of doing my comments like this. I put apostrophe, then I go dash 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 hyphens, and then I type something, and I put it up here just above where I'm going to start doing something like that. Okay? Also, don't be afraid to add some space in here to make your code readable. And then the other thing you can do if you want to is you can tab over here a little bit and do an apostrophe and add comments so that they'll apply right to this line, so you'll know exactly what you're doing. On this line you could put another one there, put another one there if you want to. It's just a matter of style, but you really need to put comments there so you remember what you did, because trust me, you're not going to remember 6 months from now. Now the final thing I want to show you on this little thing, when they hit OK, I want to take whatever's in this text box and put in the label. Alright? So let's see how we do that. So when they click on this button I call BTN print, here we are. We made a click event by double clicking on it. Now I did it before, so it's just going to come in here. This is how you do it. And this also gets students messed up when you're first learning. I'm going to say there's two ways of looking at this. I'm going to say take what's ever in the txt name text box inside of the text property, okay, and I want to put it into the label that I call LBL receipt. This is the destination, this is the source, and sometimes the stuff makes more sense when you read it from right to left. If that doesn't make sense, think of this. I want to set the text property right here for my label. I want it to equal what's ever in the text property of this little text box over here. It's the same thing, however you want to think about it. I'm just taking from one and going to the other. Now what you're going to do the first time is you're going to put this over here and you're going to put this last. You're going to do this. Okay? And that's not right. This would take what's ever in the receipt and put it back in the text box. Okay? Now, a couple shortcut keys for you. Control Z is your best friend. I'm just going to do Control Z until I get this back to where I had it. Okay? And that's where I had it. And then you hit Escape or click somewhere else. So again, take what's ever in the text box and put it in the label. This is the destination. This is where it starts. Okay? So when we look at this code, we don't really have too much here. We have an event for a quit button, we have an event for a print button, and we have an event for our button clear. Notice what happens. If they click this button, this code executes. If they click this button, it's going to come in here and do this. It doesn't pay any attention to this other stuff. These are totally independent stuff. That's why they're called private. And if they click the clear button, it's going to come in and run this piece of code, then it's going to execute this line, and then it's going to execute this line, then it's going to just sit there and wait for something to happen. It doesn't end, it doesn't start over, it just sits there and waits for someone else to do something to it. That's what object-oriented programming is about. You present a user interface, and nothing happens until your user interacts with it somehow. You know, clicking something on the keyboard, pressing the mouse, or clicking on one of your objects, like these buttons. Okay? Now we've covered quite a bit of stuff in this very, very simple project, but this is the basis for what you're going to be working with. Setting properties, putting objects on a form, making it look cool, and then figuring out how to make it do something, and making it do exactly what you want, since you're in charge as the programmer. All right? Good deal.